Hello, faithful podcast listeners. This is Todd, your favorite of the two hosts. Hey, I just wanted to give you a heads up that the following podcast was recorded live at the SharePoint Conference last week, and the audio is terrible and the video is non-existent. We were having problems with the laptop we were trying to stream with, and the room was really noisy. I did as much as I could to clean it up, but it is just not the standard of quality that you, our podcast listener and viewer, are used to. So I apologize ahead of time. Of course, it's all Shane's fault, but hopefully you'll be able to get some good, useful knowledge out of it, and the next one will be better. Thanks for your patience. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to a special Todd and Shane's podcast, and I'm looking at Shane as if the video is working, but it's not, so that's funny. So we are live on the exhibit floor at the SharePoint Conference today, the very first day. We were fresh out of the keynote, and we begged and pleaded to get a slot right after the keynote so that we could talk about all the great things they did in the keynote. And we've spent the last 45 minutes trying to get the podcasting stuff working, and that's why we have no video. It's only audio today, which probably, again, it works in our favor.
I'm just sad I put on pants. I put on pants just for this.
Not only did you put on pants,
oh, gosh,
you had to go out yesterday and buy pants.
Oh, please, Todd, tell them about me needing to buy pants.
Because somebody didn't actually bring pants to the SharePoint Conference.
That's not fair. I brought my good sweatpants.
You did. And the way this conversation went, I was landing yesterday, and Shane texted me, and I said, hey, I'm here. And he's like, hey, what are we going to do for supper? I want to do something casual. I'm wearing a T-shirt and sweatpants. So I replied, I think very reasonably, could we upgrade that to a T-shirt and blue jeans?
So demanding.
And then I got very, very quiet. And then many, many minutes later, Shane texted me back, I didn't pack any blue jeans. And so Shane had to go out last night on a Sunday night in Vegas and buy a pair of blue jeans.
The good news is that they are designer. They're like skinny, stretchy
They
jeans.
make his
like
butt
jeggings.
look so good. Yes, absolutely.
They're the most comfortable pair of jeans I've ever bought.
Yep, they absolutely, yeah. I mean, it was only like a week's wages. And they don't have a bedazzled butt, which is good, because that's something, there was a mix-up over that before, and we don't.
That was a firm requirement. I was not buying them if there was any bedazzling on my backside.
Just gives the wrong impression. But anyway, we are all fully clothed. All the important things are covered. Nothing's bedazzled that shouldn't be. And we're sitting here on the exhibit hall floor. So we're expecting to have more time.
Yep.
But we foolishly wasted all of our time playing with the podcasting gear here. So let's talk about some of the things that they covered at the keynote. So it was really long, about 6 hours by my estimation.
At least. I don't understand. Can we stop and talk about that for a minute? Why do keynotes have to be so long? I love some of the things. I love like 3 minutes of it.
Yes.
The other 14 hours.
Yeah, my butt fell asleep and woke up and walked the dog and then fell asleep again. It was a very long keynote. I remember now why we don't go to those very often.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of great things. So there were a bunch. They had it in sections, and I can't remember what there were 4 sections or something that they talked about. We kind of just took random stream of consciousness notes, which I think is what's going to happen here. But they had some really big announcements. Before we get into the stuff that I liked, Shane, what was the biggest announcement that you liked? What was the thing that you want to make sure before we run out of time that we get to talk about?
So I think for me the biggest part was the list, right?
Yes.
So they're coming out with this new list UI to make it a lot easier to create, modify, maintain your SharePoint list. So literally they showed a demo where they grabbed a bunch of Excel data, they did a Control-C, good old copy, they pasted it in the browser, and Excel or SharePoint not only put the data in place, but it was like, oh, you have an extra column, so SharePoint created a column, it figured out it was a number, but it wasn't really a number, it was a currency, so he switched it. I think that was the one thing that I looked at, I'm like, that makes a lot of sense.
That was one of the sexiest demos I've ever seen. And the funny thing about that was a week or so ago, maybe a month ago, Lori and I were talking about this, and she needed to do that exact thing.
Yep.
She had this huge spreadsheet in Excel, and she just needed it in SharePoint. And none of the import stuff was working, and we were fighting with PowerShell and all these crazy, we spent a long time fighting with that. Up on stage, Control-A, Control-C, went in there, paste, and poof. And this was a blank list, so that's the important thing. They went in, they said new list, and it was just an empty list that had no columns, no nothing, no format or anything. Hit Control-V and just pasted it in, and poof, it was all there.
Yeah, for two guys who don't really care about content at all, for us to think that was the best thing, I think that says how cool it really was.
So I've heard reference that 2018 was going to be the year of the list for the SharePoint team. again, I'm a back-end guy, and this has nothing to do with your genes. So I don't spend a lot of time playing with these things. But I will tell you that a bunch of the demos that I saw about lists and libraries today got me excited. There were a lot of, so the pasting of that, and another thing that they showed today was the lists and libraries will now auto refresh in your browser. So they showed various things, like with this list demo, they showed adding a column that was a location type, and then in the background somebody was pasting locations into that, and while they were doing the demo, the image of the location was showing up in the list without having to refresh the browser.
Yeah, there was a lot of real-time stuff, right? Because they did those examples. They also did some real-time co-authoring, right, where they went in and what do you call it? You know, they started tagging people and then like
mentioning them. Yep.
Yes, they did the at mention, like, which I think Twitter should patent because
they should have, yes. But it was funny. Twitter didn't actually do that. It was a Twitter user that did that. When Twitter first came out, that wasn't a thing, and some random Twitter guy was trying to get somebody's attention, and he did that, and Twitter embraced it from there.
So there you go. That guy had $1 billion idea. He made $0. I don't even know his name. That's sad for him.
Gone, lost in the annals of Twitter history. Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty awesome, though. You know, this tagging, and a lot of this stuff was real time. Now I will say though that tagging was interesting because they said, you know, if you tag somebody, it will share the site with them. You know, send them the invite and all that, which is facilitating more sharing.
Yep.
But as an admin, I'm not comfortable with all the sharing that Office 365 does, right? There's the SharePoint Online, the external users, and the way it all just integrates and comes together so fast really goes against a lot of the governance tenets that I've been teaching for so many years.
Yeah.
So I really struggle with the content security these days.
Yeah, and so let's take a step back. So they, the demo was somebody was working in a Word document. They had a question about something. They're leaving a comment like we've been doing in Word documents for 15 years.
Yep.
And they mentioned one of their coworkers that did have permission to it, and that person got a little pop-up, and they went in and they added some text to the document, added another comment. And then they mentioned someone who did not have permission to the document, and that's when the sharing dialog came up and said, the following people don't have permission. Do you want to give them permission? And the author said yes, and it gave them permission. They got the email and all that. So yeah, I think the functionality is amazing. I share a little bit of your fear. I guess it's easy for people to lose track of that. So when they added that second user, I don't know that everybody that contributes to that knows that person's been added. So there's a possibility for shenanigans there.
Yeah. And then just, the governance stuff that I'm teaching with, especially the on-prem customers, right, is I want lots of site collections.
Yep.
And I want the same security throughout the site collection. I want, if you got to break security inheritance, go in a different site collection.
Yeah.
But then all these features are enabling what I consider bad behavior of just tag somebody, they'll be added, move on. I don't know, I struggle.
Yeah, and that is something that Microsoft has made really, really easy in the last year or so, is just sharing, just getting, in OneDrive, in SharePoint, everywhere. And I can see your governance concerns, and I'm curious if there will be backlash against that as stuff starts leaking out.
Yeah, and then you can definitely lock down something, definitely like that. You can lock down several different pieces.
Yeah.
And you can control who does sharing, whether or not you can share. Like you can say, don't share with Power Apps 912, right? I don't want those guys really having my data shared.
They're horrible people, those guys. So derivative.
Yeah. So you have those capabilities, but at the same time, even internally sharing can get you in trouble. So
yeah, this was all internally. And I guess part of our dislike of this, Shane, is probably that the way they're doing this in the background, and you and I know this because we've been server guys forever, is they're doing item level permissions. They're breaking inheritance. And 10 years ago, that would bring SharePoint to its knees. That would just absolutely kill it. I think they've fixed that from a performance standpoint a little bit. So I think that's not as big of a deal as it was when it first came out.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not get hung up on this, but I struggle. We should come back to this topic because I'm really concerned with the future of that, but let's not go there.
Put a thing in 6 months from now in Outlook and see if we're still doing it. But that was good. And then I guess another part of that was, again, the dynamic thing. So they were in a document library. Somebody uploaded a document. The page just added it itself. There was no refresh. Somebody updated a document. The updated by, that showed up. They've got activity. Was that where the activity stuff was? That somebody had changed things? They've got that column now for the activities.
Yeah, when they had the activity feed on the dashboard now, right? So you have the office.com dashboard where they want you to start your day.
Yeah, that's what it was.
And so not only is there an activity feed there, but there's also, these are the documents that the AI using the Office 365 graph, and I did AI in big quotes, you can't see it.
Yeah, big bear quotes.
Right, but they're going to recommend, these are documents we think you're looking for today. These are documents we think are inside your frame of reference. And I thought that was just an interesting way of going at it.
Yeah. So I definitely think for even non-business user folks, the updates to lists and libraries are really, really compelling. I was really impressed. Like you, I don't get excited about lists and libraries very much, but there were a couple of demos that they showed that were really, really exciting. I really like how you can create a list from copying something out of Excel, and then as soon as the list is created, you can export it to Excel. I like that. This is the circle of life there for data.
Very meta for you.
Yeah, I definitely appreciated that.
Yeah, when I thought also, speaking of libraries, they mentioned that the document library web part is the #1 used web part, it sounds like.
Yeah, I can see that.
But they said that they've invested a whole bunch in making all the features show up in the web part that show up in the list, which is like what we had in SharePoint 2003, and they took away from us, and now they wanted applause for giving it back to us. I was like, I don't know if I dig this.
Yeah, well, and I don't know if it's still the case, but certainly in previous years and in previous versions of SharePoint, the team that wrote lists and designed lists was a different team that wrote and designed document libraries.
Right.
And they had a lot in common, but it wasn't like there was, at a lower level, somebody making sure that vision was the same. And so you get these weird things where doing the same thing in two different places was a different process. So I'm glad that they've got that a little more, set together.
Yeah, so bringing up the vision stuff, right? So one of the things they demoed was the cognitive AI, right? That's one of the searches via Azure.
Yep.
But so now they're using that with images. So when you upload an
image. Oh, yes, that was awesome.
Yeah, so you want to talk about kind of what you saw there?
Yeah, so they, like Shane said, they're using the Azure cognitive things. And so the example they gave was a travel site, and they were uploading pictures from different cities, and they were using Vienna. And he uploaded a picture of Vienna, and the cognitive services were able to look at that picture and say, I guess this was Amsterdam. He said, look, it's a boat on a lake, or on a river, which it's not, it's a canal. But I'll give the cognitive services. That's close. That's good. Most humans would probably screw that up. But it was able to add metadata to the document, the picture in the library, that it was a person, in a boat on a river. And then it's also able to OCR the image and strip things out and put the text in there so you can search on the text that's in the image. It was able to pull out a lot of really impressive things.
Yeah, and then the very last demo they did there, so their fictitious Contoso company had the old logo and the new logo.
Yeah.
And so they trained it so when you uploaded pictures, it could identify what Contoso logo you were using, and it was flagging those columns.
Yeah, it was flagging pictures. So the scenario they set up was different vendors using the logo, and they had pictures of these vendors, and one of the vendors was using the old logo, and it had a little red thing on it. So that was pretty impressive.
Yeah, and as the hooligans are telling us in the chat room, right? Mark is saying, hey, users are lazy. They don't like to tag their photos, so it's pretty awesome that they are doing that for us.
Yeah, and I can tell you just from personal stuff, I take about 1 million pictures a month on my phone.
Really?
I take pictures of everything, and there are a bunch of times where I've searched for stuff, but I can't, I don't remember when I took the picture. The OneDrive does some of that stuff already where I can, it tries to auto tag things, and that has been incredibly helpful in finding pictures of things that I've been looking for. So I definitely encourage them going forward with that. It can get a little creepy. Like I know the Google service will pick people out.
Yep.
And figure them out. And my kids, so I've got pictures of my kids from literally from the day they were born up till today. And it's been able to stitch those together in a way that was a little weird.
It'll make Big Brother's tracking a lot easier.
Yeah, it'll definitely save the government a lot of time.
What would be really helpful, though, is if we do it for an audience. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but Andrew Connell is now sitting out there staring at us. So they should be tagging, who this is as the people go by. It's been a very weird a few days of seeing all his faces again.
Yeah. I thought the tying into the Azure Cognitive Services was really cool. I can see a lot of good uses for that. And it rounds out that picture of, once you get your content in the cloud, it just opens up so many other opportunities for things that you can do.
Yeah, I think another thing that was interesting, speaking of SharePoint 2003, is they brought back a bunch of targeting stuff. So, audience targeting. And I remember literally with the SharePoint 2003 I built for a university that we did a whole bunch of, targeting for on-campus versus off-campus and faculty and staff versus professors. And so a bunch of targeting capabilities are coming back into the fold, which makes for a better experience. It takes a little work to set up and define your audiences, but makes for a better look and setup overall.
Yeah, and I think we're definitely at the spot now where there's so much data in our corporate repository, so much data in SharePoint, so much data everywhere, that we need things like that to help winnow down what things are applicable for people. And so the targeting and the cognitive stuff and the AI stuff that bubbles it up in Office is going to become just completely necessary. or people are just going to get even more overwhelmed. Speaking of the targeting and all that, they showed some functionality with the hub sites.
Yep.
Hub sites are a new functionality in Office 365, and I think they're all out now. I think it's
roughly, they've been deployed.
Yeah. So this is the idea that you can, and it's something that we have wanted in SharePoint ever since SharePoint was born.
Yep.
The ability to have a site collection that serves as a hub site and other site collections that pull certain attributes from that, inherit that. So things like branding and permissions and these kind of things, but they're all peers at the site collection level. And so that's on its way out. A couple of cool things. I think right now you have to define the hub site from PowerShell. So I think you need to be a tenant admin and do some PowerShell magic. But once that's in and once the system recognizes it, then you can go into any site collection if you're an administrator and pick a hub site to become a member of that hub site.
Okay.
And then you get the branding and all the very consistent thing. And again, that just gives another signal back to the back end to say these are things that Shane cares about because they're in these hub sites. Well, one of the things they announced today was there's going to be the ability to tie scripts to that. So when you bring a site collection into a hub site group, you can define a set of actions to happen to that site collection. And they showed, creating lists and libraries and things like that.
Yeah, well, they also did shared navigation. That's the first time I'd heard a reference to shared navigation, which is, once again, we've only wanted for about 17 and a half years, I think. So.
Yeah, roughly, yeah. And so that was really good. And I guess, one of the things is, since this is all up in the cloud, it stinks because we can't keep track of it, but once they get that figured out and they test it and they can just drop it in your tenant and it's there and you don't have to wait the 3 years and all of that.
Yeah, so you mentioned branding, and I thought one of the things that was really interesting, this is completely not important at all, but that's typically
none of this
show.
is, yeah.
A lot of the branding that they were using, even like in some of their demos and with their tweets, it looked like Cards Against Humanity. Right? You ever play Cards Against Humanity, right? It's a very static black card with a very specific white font. Mm-hmm. All of their branding, the new corporate guidelines, I guess, was probably more accessible.
Yeah.
Was Cards Against Humanity. Now I've seen it. I can't unsee it. Now you can't unsee it. So you're welcome for that gift.
Yeah, I'm sure somewhere there was some focus group, people going through looking for the fonts and the proportions between the different size fonts, and that was the one that was the most readable and all that. And it might have been that whole thing where, I think it was famously the UK put out a thing to name a boat, and the internet got to pick, and they picked Boating McBoatface. I wonder if this wasn't the same thing where they had all these study groups and people were like, pick the one that looks like Cards from Humanity, Cards Against Humanity. And that's what they ended up getting stuck with.
Yeah, well, yeah, I bet they haven't realized it, though. I bet when they find out and they realize that darn intern snuck in.
Yep, after Jeff Teeper listens to this episode, big fan of the show, Jeff.
Well, yeah, I mean, he stopped by for an autograph. I told him
we had to put him off. He wasn't important enough. Yeah, we had a show to do.
But I'm glad you brought Jeff up. I don't know if you noticed, but Jeff and I got the memo. We were both wearing black shirts with a black belt and these trendy cool jeans. Jeff and I were like virtual twins. I mean, I'm a foot taller than him, but that's besides the point. We were virtual twins today.
So I wonder if you wouldn't have went out and bought pants 12 hours ago, what Jeff would have worn today. He'd have showed up in his best sweatpants or
good sweatpants. These are my good sweatpants, not best. Good.
Not the best. Let's not exaggerate here. I've got, oh goodness. Yeah, so you guys are both best twinsies, very adorable.
What about your favorite OneDrive?
OneDrive got a lot of love, and it's difficult these days to really separate SharePoint and OneDrive. They had a really good infographic at the beginning that showed what SharePoint was, and they kind of showed that SharePoint is the platform, the presentation layer now for things like OneDrive and all that. So it's tough to get excited about SharePoint without getting excited about OneDrive. But they announced a couple of really big things, new OneDrive clients for mobile apps for iOS and Android, but that in and of itself is not that exciting because they've been updating that thing constantly for the last couple of years and just adding new things. One of the things that they're adding is the ability to do scan from inside of OneDrive, the OneDrive client. So as I'm traveling, and that's not out yet, and I wish that it was, because as I'm traveling for this conference, every time you and I go to eat or go buy pants or whatever we do, I have to scan my receipt and then upload it so I can do my expense report.
Yep.
And I have to do it in Office Lens, which is an app that I have loved dearly from the day that it came out. And then it puts it up into OneDrive, and I have to sort it around. Well, now, with the new version of the client that will be coming out at some point, the scan thing is built into the client. And I think it's already in Android. They only ever showed the demo with iOS, and there was a big scan button in the middle. I'm pretty sure on Android I can do add and then scan. It's like two thumb presses, but it'll scan directly into OneDrive from the OneDrive client.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting to hear. I mean, because even Jeff admitted that OneDrive has come the furthest of anything, right? Over the last 18 months, 2 years, it felt like he really felt like OneDrive is the product that has had the most wins in that time frame.
I agree. Cynically, I would say that was because of where they started from.
True story, true story.
If you look at OneDrive 2 years ago, it was a much maligned product, and I would say it earned every bit of those things. But so they showed like the files on demand. That's been out for a few months now, and that's the ability to have the OneDrive client sync to a bunch of your on-prem or online document libraries and sites without taking any space locally. So that's been good. They had a couple of other OneDrive things.
Well, yes, I think another big OneDrive, if you want to talk about the demo they showed us in the admin section at the end, right? The malware.
Oh, yes, the files restore. Yeah, and I can't remember if we've talked about that on the podcast or not. But they showed on one of the PCs, they showed somebody executing some ransomware.
Yep.
And they showed it was funny. They showed it live, and again, auto updates. Everything refreshes quickly. It encrypted all the files and then left the nasty little "here's how to get your file back" text file. And then the OneDrive client on her PC popped up and said, "Hey, I think you got hit by malware," and you could go into the OneDrive admin thing and restore everything back. And OneDrive is smart enough to know exactly when the infection happened and create the restore point for you, so you don't have to guess when it happened. It's just right there. And that's funny because it's not necessarily new features, because you've been able to restore versions of files forever. But what it does is it puts it all in one thing. You don't have to find every file everywhere. You just dial one thing back and it just rolls it all back for you.
Yeah, we've talked about it forever. That's been a scenario, but to watch it happen in real time was just really very cool. And it also kind of brought us back, and I'm surprised they didn't connect the dots, but in the beginning in Jeff's talk, he said, we like to think of Office 365 as part of the Microsoft 365 experience, right? Yeah. That's the first time I'd ever heard anyone really say they were trying to tie those two stories together, which makes complete sense.
Yeah.
Since they stole our 365 jerks. But, that was just a perfect example of how this fits in, and now Defender working with OneDrive and speaking the same language and know what's going on. That to me was just a nice, tight story that who didn't look at that and go, that makes a lot of sense for my company.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about it on the regular podcast before. Malware and this ransomware is the first malicious software that's actually scared me a lot. So when all this stuff first came out, 20 years ago, it was all just people doing it because they could do it.
Right.
There was no malicious intent other than screwing with people. But now it's a business. There's big money. There's big political power behind it. And this ransomware thing has really taken off, and it's something that's really scared me. But now, as somebody who's moved almost all this stuff into OneDrive, I kind of don't feel scared about it anymore. I'm kind of I'm emboldened to click things I wouldn't have clicked, a week ago.
Yeah.
So.
No, and it's
I'm on hotel internet, so what could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? Well, that's so maybe in the show Wednesday, our normal talk about whatever show, we'll talk a little bit about the fake cell towers article that I read earlier this morning, right? And I mean, it's right? Who knew that walking around my cell phone is now a dangerous thing? I mean,
yeah.
So not only is Big Brother tracking me, it turns out all these other people. It used to be the Chinese only track me from my microwave in my house.
I remember the good old days.
But now they want to track me when I'm out and about. It's just not right.
Yeah, and I remember helping them out. I bought a second microwave for the house, to expand their coverage. I've got a bigger house now since we moved, and so the one microwave wasn't enough. And
and Snoopy, your cat's the Russian spy. It's life. But we won't get off on that tangent.
We don't.
So I think the only topic really left.
Was there anything else? Oh, so I do want to think. So I think I know the thing that you're going to talk about. Yeah. So one other thing that I wanted to talk about, and they hit this a bunch, and I don't know if I agree with them, but Microsoft is really excited about Teams. And they seem to be the only people that are really excited about Teams. And they spend a lot of time talking about Teams, how SharePoint lists and libraries and pages and everything are going in Teams, and everybody's just going to work out of Teams. And they might just come up with like a team computer that all it does is just run the Teams client. You just do everything out of Teams. And in the real world, outside of Redmond, I just don't know very many people that like Teams that much.
Yeah, no, I mean, the fear is I think their plan is that Teams becomes the center of the universe.
I think they as much said that today.
Yeah, right? Yeah, I feel like in one of the other calls they directly said it, right? This idea that Teams should be the point that you work down from, and SharePoint and all that is just a component of Teams.
Yeah, the storage layer for Teams.
So, I mean, they'll change their mind in like 6 months, right? But
I hope so, yeah.
But yeah, Teams Teams is more important to them than it is to the rest of us, I think.
Yeah, and so a couple of things they showed off today were that if you've got your files view in Teams, so Teams already has that, but now it's going to have that rich document library web part that shows all the stuff that the web part does in SharePoint. And then the ability to make pages inside of Teams that are, web parts and all that. So yeah, they're really doubling down on that. As somebody who uses Teams, I don't like it. And I don't like a couple of things about it specifically. I mean, I don't care. I use Slack, which is Teams, and the functionality doesn't bother me. But Teams falls down spectacularly in two very important areas. Number one, switching teams from one tenant to another.
Okay.
So I do work with a couple of different clients, and they all do their stuff during Teams, and I have my own team and all of that. And switching between those takes many seconds, tens of dozens of seconds.
Tens of dozens of seconds.
Yes, and so it becomes very difficult if I'm carrying on a conversation with one customer and then another customer posts something and I need to switch over to that. Inside of Slack, I click and it just goes. Of course, Slack's taking up 14 gig of RAM, but if it's using that to make my experience better, rock on. But inside of Teams, it takes forever, and then I answer that question. I have to go back to the other client, and then it takes another 20, 30 seconds of the Teams thing. So that's one place that it spectacularly falls down because I just can't keep working. And the other place is notifications. Like I never know when somebody's hitting me in Teams. I never know. Like I'll be doing something else, and Slack will be going off like a slot machine, and I'll be talking over there. And then I'll look back, and there'll be a bunch of messages waiting for me in Teams. People tapping their foot and waiting for me.
Yeah, well, so I'll be honest, right? I still have not used Teams a single time yet. So I have no idea what you're talking of, but that's pretty good.
You have a lot of frustrations to look forward to.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the things that, sometimes I feel like those are us problems more than the rest of the world, right? I have like 1,712 Office 365 accounts. So yeah, I'm always trying to log into a different tenant.
Yep.
And it never works on the first try.
No.
So I still think Google wins that. I think Google's got a much better switching
absolutely
tenant,
without a doubt
experience.
Without a doubt. So yeah, I'm excited that they're fixing some stuff in Teams, and I saw, so we're going to talk about a couple other things, and there were a lot of excited tweets and all that, but one of the things that people, reasonable criticism they were giving was all this new stuff is great, but there's a whole lot of really important things on user voice that maybe you should be fixing instead. And I think, so like for Teams, I think the switching and the notifications is that.
Yeah, there was a lot of angry tweets. One person in particular, we won't call him out, but yeah, he seemed to be a little upset with that.
Offended at how Microsoft was spending their dollar, yeah.
And I think the thing he was most offended by was our friend, the new big announcement.
The big announcement. So before we say what the big announcement was, what was your take on the big announcement?
Meh.
Yeah, I don't get it. Like I feel like there was some part of it that I just didn't understand that I will come to later. But the big announcement that they've done a good job of keeping under wraps because, there are different channels to find things, and there was, embargoes and things like that. But this was one that they did a good job keeping under wraps, a little piece of functionality called SharePoint Spaces.
Oh, is that where you bring mixed reality, Pokemon Go to SharePoint?
Yeah, and I don't get it. Like I've never, ever, in the 15 years that I've been doing SharePoint, ever looked at SharePoint and went, I wish all of these documents looked like they were on a hilltop with birds chirping in the background. Like that has just never occurred to me. But it's there. Well, it's in, preview or whatever.
Yeah, early preview.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I hear you. I guess I've come in my old age to appreciate that this is not the end. But this is that big leap.
I get you. Yeah.
2 years from now, we're going to look back at some cool thing that we loved, and we're going to realize that the people that suffered through this Spaces stuff now, lowercase s, by the way. I don't know if you noticed.
I did notice that. Yeah, that was odd. And so I completely agree with you. And that rolls back to something they mentioned. They said, the last time we were here 4 years ago, blah, blah, blah. And that was when they announced Delve.
Right.
And I remember seeing Delve and going, I see zero value in Delve as it stands, but the Office Graph, the technology behind Delve, now does all these other things, and so the people who suffered through Delve and gave them feedback have created some good products for us. So yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting. I'll tell you, the chat room has already suggested that I should go buy Spaces 911, so it's only a matter of time.
Lowercase s.
Oh man, but the browser handle, I'm confused.
Yeah, so for those of you that haven't watched it, and you can go out and watch the keynote, It is mixed reality for SharePoint, and it is for all of the platforms. So if you're sitting at a PC or a Mac and you've got a browser, you can sift through things. And they showed uploading products from Contoso into a document library, and these products were 3D renderings of things, and you could look at them and zoom in on them and spin them around. And if there were tags on things, you could tag them. So that is an interesting way to see data that way. If you had VR glasses, they showed that experience. They had the handset, and he was picking things that way. I think part of what makes that not as impressive is that no human alive is cool enough to not look like a complete dork with a VR headset on. And so there is just no way to demo SharePoint Spaces without just looking silly.
Yeah, but I mean, at some point it's going to be the holodeck, right? We're going to have, Star Trek: The Next
Yes,
Generation.
it will.
Walk in.
There'll be lenses that we pop onto our eyes or something. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I look forward to it, and I definitely know that we're kind of running up here at the end. So we can talk about more of it. We'll do the real show. We'll do the real show live from here.
But as Tuesday, not Wednesday. It is Tuesday, 5 o'clock Pacific time.
Okay, so make sure we get that done. We will also hopefully have worked out all the audio kinks and the video kinks. So we apologize for the little bit of static that we're afraid you're probably hearing on the live podcast.
Sorry about that.
You know us, we're usually sticklers for it. We spent 45 minutes trying to sort it out. It is what it is.
Yep. And so I think, we got to take off. There's another set coming. And also we're sitting in the exhibit hall, and there are a bunch of exhibitors here. This place is packed. But one of my favorite exhibitors, a little company called SysKit. So I'm going to be going to theirs. Booth 423, I believe, is their home for the week. And so definitely stop by and see what they've got going on. They've got some products to show you. They've got some demos, things like that. And so I'll be swinging by there.
Very cool. Well, I look forward to it. I know we got a busy couple of days, so guess we'll move on. Let somebody else have these wonderful little setup, and we'll go do our. We gotta talk here in a couple hours.
We do. We have 3 hours. A chat room. Thanks so much. You guys were invaluable in helping get this thing troubleshot.
Yes.
So we appreciate that. But we will see you all in 24 hours when we do the next podcast. And if you're here at the conference and you caught this, come find us, say hello. We'd love to chat, talk about old times, things like that.
Sounds good. All right.
Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Toodles.